They say history is written by the victors. That's only partly true. History is written by those who have the courage to document it, even when documenting means risking everything. My name is Chen Meiling, and I am 75 years old. For 60 years, I carried a secret that could have killed me 100 times over. A wooden box, hidden under the floorboards, that moved from house to house, from city to city, containing evidence of what a decorated general did to 51 women during the Chinese Civil War. Today, that box is in an archive in Taipei. And the name of that general, once celebrated throughout China, is now synonymous with the word monster. This is the story of how a 19-year-old girl from the countryside became a documenter of atrocities and how paper and ink became more powerful than bullets and patents. If you believe that documentation and evidence matter, comment evidence below. This story proves why. But I need to start from the beginning, before understanding the true meaning of power, before learning that the pen is truly mightier than the sword, but only if you are willing to use it when swords are pressed against your throat. I was born in 1950, but my story begins in 1946, in Shandong province, when the Chinese Civil War was tearing our country apart. Nationalists against communists. Brother against brother. Villages destroyed, families torn apart, millions displaced. My father was a civil servant in the local government office, neutral out of necessity, serving whoever controlled our region at any given time. Survival meant flexibility. Principles were luxuries the poor couldn't afford. He taught me to read and write when I was 4 years old. Unusual for a girl, but my father believed that literacy was a safeguard against a chaotic world. Mei Ling, he would tell me, governments change, armies come and go, but words remain. If you know how to read and write, you will never be completely powerless. He was right, though not in the way I imagined. My mother ran a small noodle shop. We weren't rich, but we survived. 3 children, me, my older brother, June, and my younger sister, Hua. We were ordinary people living in extraordinary times, trying to remain invisible while the world burned around us. Type survive, if your family has stories of surviving war or conflict. In the autumn of 1946, the nationalist forces took control of our region. With them came General Zhao Yunfei, a man whose name was already legendary. He was 45 years old, a career military officer from a prominent Shanghai family, educated partly in Japan, fluent in several languages. He'd fought against the Japanese invasion, earning medals and commendations. He was considered a hero. When his regiment arrived, our town was required to provide housing, food, administrative support. My father, as a government clerk, was assigned to work with the military administration. I was 16, and because I could read, write, and do arithmetic, I was brought in to help with records and logistics. General Zhao was impressive at first glance. Tall for a Chinese man of that era, always impeccably uniformed, educated and articulate. He spoke to local leaders with respect, promised protection from communist raids, assured us his troops would maintain discipline. For the first few weeks, it seemed true. His soldiers were orderly. There was less looting than we'd feared. People began to relax. That was his strategy, I realize now. Establish trust. Create a sense of security. Make people lower their guard. Predators are patient. It started with the daughter of a merchant family. Her name was Lin Suyin, 18 years old, engaged to be married. She worked in her father's fabric shop. One day, she was summoned to the military headquarters to discuss a supply requisition. Her father was told the meeting would take an hour at most. She returned 3 hours later, silent, her clothing disheveled, walking like every step caused pain. She wouldn't speak. Wouldn't eat. 3 days later, she drowned herself in the river. The official story was that she'd been overcome with anxiety about the war situation. Her family, deceiving, said nothing. But I knew. I'd seen her that day, waiting outside the general's office, nervous but obedient. I'd seen her face when she emerged. I recognized that look. It's the look of someone whose soul has been murdered while their body remains alive. If you've ever witnessed injustice and stayed silent because you were afraid, you're not alone. Comment, witnessed below. 2 weeks after Suyin's death, I was summoned. The general wanted help organizing personnel files, I was told. My father was proud, his daughter, chosen for important administrative work. It meant status, extra rations, possible protection. I went because refusal wasn't an option. In wartime, you obey orders or you disappear. The general's office was in a commandeered mansion on the hill overlooking town. Beautiful gardens, now trampled by military boots. Inside, the rooms were decorated with art looted from wealthier families, maps covering the walls, the smell of expensive cigarettes and rice wine. He greeted me formally, almost kindly, offered tea, asked about my family, praised my handwriting. For the first hour, we actually did work. I organized personnel records, wrote correspondence, filed reports. Then his adjutant was dismissed. The door was locked. I won't detail what happened next. You can imagine, I'm sure. But what made it worse, what made General Zhao different from common criminals, was the clinical, methodical nature of it. He explained, almost conversationally, that this was his privilege as a commanding officer. That I should feel honored. That if I spoke of it, my family would be arrested as communist collaborators and executed. Then he assaulted me. When it was over, he had his assistant escort me out through a back entrance. Give me a small bag of rice as payment for my clerical services. I walked home in a daze, the bag of rice burning in my hands like evidence of my own complicity. Survivors of assault, if you're reading this, you are so much stronger than you know. Comment survivor if you stand with victims. That night, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't wash away the feeling of his hands, his breath, his weight. But unlike Suin, I didn't want to die. I wanted him to pay. The problem was obvious. He was a general with an army. I was a 16-year-old girl with nothing. Speaking out meant death for me and my family. Going to authorities meant going to his subordinates, who'd never believe me over him. I needed proof. Evidence. Documentation. I remembered my father's words. Words remain. So I began to write. That night, I took a notebook my father used for accounting and I wrote everything down. Date, time, location, what was said, what was done, how I was threatened. I wrote in the smallest characters I could manage, to save paper. I hid the notebook under my mattress. I didn't know what I'd do with it. I just knew I needed to record it. To make it real. To prevent it from becoming a story I could be gaslit into doubting. 3 days later, I was summoned again. Administrative assistance, the same phrase, the same excuse. This time I knew what it meant. I went because I would refuse to raise suspicion. And because I'd made a decision, if I had to toughen this, I would document everything. I would become a witness to my own destruction and his crimes. When I returned home, I wrote it down. Second entry. Same precision, same detail. Documentation is resistance. If you believe in the power of recording truth, type document below. Over the following weeks, I was summoned regularly. Sometimes for actual clerical work, sometimes for his privileges. I learned to dissociate, to let my mind float above my body, to survive by becoming a recorder rather than a participant. But I also began to notice patterns. Other girls and women were summoned too. I started paying attention, memorizing names, watching their faces before and after. There was Zhong Wei, 21, a teacher's daughter. Lu Feng, 17, who worked at the post office. Wang Xiaohong, a widow in her 30s. Chen Ning, 15 years old, just 15. I saw them in town afterward, that same shattered look in their eyes. The way they walked. The silence. I realized I wasn't alone. None of us were alone. We were a hidden battalion of victims, suffering in isolation, each believing we were the only one. That's what predators count on. Isolation. Shame. Silence. I decided to break it. Approaching the other women was terrifying. What if they reported me? What if the general found out? What if they were too traumatized to help? But I had to try. I started with Zhong Wei, the teacher's daughter. I found her at the market, looking hollow-eyed and thin. I stood next to her at a vegetable stall and whispered, "He did it to me too." She went rigid. Didn't look at me. But after a moment, she whispered back, "How many times?" 7 times now, I said. 12, she replied. I've lost count. We had a brief, coded conversation. I told her I was writing everything down. Asked if she could remember dates, details. She looked at me like I was insane. What good will writing do? She asked. He's a general. We're nothing. Maybe we're nothing now, I said. But history is long. Wars end. Generals fall. Documents remain. She thought for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Collective courage starts with one person breaking the silence. Type courage, if you've ever been that person, or want to be. Over the next several months, I carefully, cautiously made contact with other victims. Not all were willing to talk. Some were too afraid, too broken, too ashamed. But enough were angry, and anger is powerful fuel. We met in secret, in the back of shops, in temple courtyards, during accidental encounters at the market. We shared our stories in whispers and fragments. And I wrote it all down. I created a system. Each woman was assigned a number for safety. If the documents were discovered, no names would be revealed. I recorded dates, times, locations, what was said, what was done, any witnesses who might have seen us entering or leaving. I noted patterns in his behavior, the rotation of his adjutants, the times he was most likely to summon victims. Zhang Wei, who was literate, helped me. She had beautiful handwriting. We split the documentation between us. If one set was discovered, the other might survive. We didn't have cameras. We couldn't collect physical evidence in a modern sense. But we had something powerful, consistent, detailed, corroborated testimony from multiple sources. By mid-1947, I had documented 38 women. 38 separate victims, their stories recorded in tiny, precise characters on stolen paper, hidden in increasingly creative locations. In August 1947, I nearly lost everything. My mother, cleaning my room, found one of the notebooks hidden in a false bottom of a drawer. She couldn't read well, but she recognized the general's name repeated throughout the pages. She was deceiving. Mei Ling, what is this? If anyone finds this, we'll all be killed. I broke down and told her everything. What he'd done to me, to the others. Why I was documenting it. My mother wept. Then she became silent, her face hardening into an expression I'd never seen before. Your father must never know, she said finally. It would kill him. He believes his work with the military protects us. Then she did something unexpected. She took off her jacket and showed me her back. There were scars there, old ones, long healed. When I was 14, during the warlord period, a soldier did something similar, she said quietly. I had no way to fight back. No way to record it. It became a ghost story I told myself at night, something I wondered if I'd imagined. You're doing something I never could. You're making it real. Making it undeniable. She helped me create better hiding places. She became my lookout, my ally, my co-conspirator. Mothers who protect their daughters are heroes. Type if you have or had a fierce mother. By 1948, the tide of the Civil War was turning. The communists were gaining ground. General Zhao's forces were being pushed back, defeat looming. This made him more dangerous. Desperate men are unpredictable. The assaults became more frequent, more violent. He knew his time was running out, and he took what he could while he still had power. The list grew, 40 women, 45, 50. 50 women and girls, ages 14 to 42, all violated by the same man over a 3-year period. I documented them all. In January 1949, communist forces surrounded our region. The nationalists prepared to retreat. General Zhao's regiment was ordered to withdraw to positions farther south. I felt a strange mixture of relief and rage. Relief that the assaults would end. Rage that he would escape without consequence, moving on to assault women in other regions, his reputation intact. Before leaving, the nationalist forces destroyed records, burned documents, eliminated evidence of their occupation. I watched them throw files into bonfires, smoke rising into the winter sky. I thought about my hidden notebooks. Thought about adding them to the flames, destroying the evidence of my shame. But I couldn't. Those pages represented 51 women's pain. Destroying them would be like declaring that pain didn't matter. So I kept them. When the communists took control, life changed rapidly. New government, new rules, new dangers. There were trials, executions, redistributions of land and property. My father lost his position. He'd worked for the nationalists, which made him suspect. We were classified as politically unreliable. We went from poor to destitute. But I was alive. We were alive. And hidden beneath the floorboards of our small house was a wooden box containing 6 notebooks documenting General Zhao's crimes. I told no one except my mother. Not my father, not my siblings, not friends. The fewer people who knew, the safer we all were. Sometimes survival means carrying secrets alone. Type carried, if you've ever borne a burden you couldn't share. 4 years, I debated what to do with the documentation. The war was over. The nationalists had fled to Taiwan. General Zhao had retreated there too, I learned through rumors. He was safe, protected by a regime that needed every experienced officer. Reporting him to communist authorities was impossible. They'd ask why I'd worked for a nationalist general, why I'd waited so long to speak. I'd be denounced as a collaborator or a liar. Reporting him to nationalist authorities in Taiwan was equally impossible. He was their hero. They'd never believe accusations from a mainland woman with no proof beyond handwritten notebooks. So I waited. And while I waited, I survived. I married a kind man in 1952, a factory worker who knew nothing about my past. We had 3 children. I became a schoolteacher, ironically working with girls the same age I'd been when the assaults began. I lived an ordinary life on the surface. But in secret, I maintained the documentation. Every few years, when we moved houses, I moved the box. When my husband renovated our bedroom, I hid the box in the walls before he noticed. The documentation became my shadow companion, my witness, my proof that I hadn't imagined it all. In the late 1960s, during the Cultural Revolution, things became dangerous again. Red Guards searched homes, destroyed bourgeois materials, interrogated families about their histories. I nearly burned the notebooks then. Having documentation of service to a nationalist general could mean execution. But I couldn't do it. One night, alone while my family slept, I opened the box and read through the entries. 51 women, their suffering recorded in careful detail. Some entries I'd written while still bleeding, my hands shaking so hard the characters were barely legible. I realized, these weren't my documents. They belonged to all of us. I didn't have the right to destroy them just to save myself. So I sealed the box more carefully, buried it deeper, and prayed the Red Guards wouldn't find it. They didn't. We survived the Cultural Revolution. The box survived too. What we protect says what we value. Comment protected, if you've ever risked everything to preserve truth. The real change came in the 1980s. After Deng Xiaoping's reforms began opening China to the world. Historians started publishing more honest accounts of the Civil War period. Activists began documenting human rights violations, including systematic sexual violence during wartime. I read an article in 1983 about a researcher collecting testimonies of women who'd survived wartime sexual assault. Her name was Dr. Li Xiaofeng, a professor at Beijing Normal University. I was 63 years old. I'd carried this secret for 37 years. I wrote her a letter. A careful letter, saying I had historical documents related to systematic sexual violence by a nationalist officer during the Civil War. I didn't give my name or address initially. I just wanted to know if she'd be interested. She responded immediately. Yes, she was interested. Yes, the documentation would be valuable. Yes, she could guarantee confidentiality if I wished. We corresponded for 6 months before I trusted her enough to reveal my identity and location. In 1984, Dr. Li traveled to my home city. I put her at a tea house, the wooden box in a cloth bag at my feet. I was deceiving she'd dismiss me, call me a liar, say the documents were fabricated. Instead, when I opened the box and showed her the notebooks, her hands started shaking. "Do you understand what you have here?" she whispered, tears in her eyes. "This is unprecedented. Personal documentation from victims during the assault. Detailed records spanning years. Corroborated testimony from dozens of women. This is... She paused, searching for words. This is history that was supposed to disappear, she finally said. You preserved it. You kept it alive. We spent 3 days going through every page. She helped me identify which women might still be alive, which families might be willing to come forward, how to verify details through military records and historical documents. Most importantly, she connected me with survivors' networks in Taiwan. Because General Zhao was still alive. Still living in Taipei. Still celebrated as a war hero. Truth delayed is not truth denied. If you believe it's never too late for justice, comment, never too late. With Dr. Lee's help, I began searching for the other 50 women I'd documented. Many had died. Some had fled to other countries. Some had changed their names, disappeared into new identities. But we found 12. 12 women still alive, scattered across China and Taiwan. One by one, carefully, I contacted them. Some remembered me immediately. Others had blocked out that entire period, the trauma too deep to access. I thought I was the only one, said Chinning, the woman who'd been 15 when the assaults began. She was now in her 50s, living in Shanghai. I thought I'd imagined how bad it was. You wrote it down? You recorded everything. Everything, I confirmed. She wept. Someone witnessed me. Someone believed me all along. That phrase, someone witnessed me, stayed with me. That's what documentation does. It witnesses. It believes. It remembers when memory fails. 8 of the 12 women agreed to come forward publicly. 4 chose to remain anonymous but provided corroboration for specific details. In 1987, Dr. Lee published a research paper titled Systematic Sexual Violence by Military Officers During the Chinese Civil War, a case study based on contemporary documentation. The paper didn't name General Zhao directly, not yet. But it detailed everything: the patterns, the number of victims, the methods of coercion, the systematic nature of the crimes. It included excerpts from my documentation, testimony from survivors, corroboration from historical records. The academic community was shocked. Sexual violence in war was acknowledged but rarely documented with this level of detail from the victim's perspective. Copies of the paper reached Taiwan. General Zhao, now 86 years old, issued a statement calling it communist propaganda designed to smear nationalist heroes. But then something unexpected happened. The truth has a way of finding confirmation. Type truth finds a way, if you've seen this happen. After the paper's publication, 3 women in Taiwan came forward with their own stories. The general had been stationed in Taiwan after the retreat, and apparently, his behavior hadn't changed. These women had stayed silent for decades, just like us. But seeing mainland survivors speak up gave them courage. Their testimonies matched the patterns in my documentation exactly. Same methods of coercion, same threats, same clinical detachment. Now there were 54 documented victims across 35 years. The Taiwanese press picked up the story. It became a scandal. A decorated war hero accused by dozens of women of systematic sexual assault spanning decades. Zhao's family hired lawyers. Character witnesses emerged. Fellow officers defended him. The usual mechanisms of power protecting power activated. But we had something they couldn't fight: documentation. Detailed, contemporary records. Not recovered memories or vague accusations, but precise accounts written as the crimes occurred, corroborated by multiple witnesses, consistent across decades. There was talk of a trial. Legal experts debated jurisdiction. Crimes committed on the mainland under nationalist military law, accused living in Taiwan, victims scattered across multiple countries. In the end, formal prosecution proved impossible. Too much time had passed. Jurisdictional issues were insurmountable. The political will wasn't there. But something more important happened. In 1989, General Zhao Yunfei died. He was 88 years old. His obituary in the Taiwanese papers mentioned his military service, his medals, his contributions to the war effort. It also mentioned the allegations. The documentation. The 54 women. His name would forever be associated with his crimes. That was the headline. That was his legacy. Sometimes justice isn't a courtroom verdict. Sometimes it's the truth being recorded permanently. Comment, recorded, if you understand this. In 1990, I donated the original notebooks to the Taiwan National Archives. They're preserved there now, in temperature-controlled cases, available to researchers, historians, students. 51 women's testimonies, written in my careful characters on yellowing paper, ink faded but words still legible. The archive exhibit is called Witnesses, Documentation of Sexual Violence in Wartime, 1946 to 1949. Thousands of people have viewed it. Students write papers about it. Activists cite it as evidence for the importance of documenting atrocities in real time. Those 6 notebooks I hid under floorboards, moved from house to house for 40 years, became part of permanent historical record. After the publication and archive donation, I was invited to speak at universities, women's organizations, human rights conferences. At first, I declined. I'm not a public speaker, just an old woman with a story. But Dr. Lee convinced me. Your presence matters, she said. Anyone can read the documents. But hearing you explain why you documented, how you survived, what it costs you, that's irreplaceable. So I started speaking. Not eloquently, not dramatically. I just told the truth. I told students that documentation is an act of resistance. That writing things down when you're powerless is a way of seizing power back. I told young women that their testimony matters, that they don't have to remain silent, that corroboration and detail and persistence can overcome even the most protected predators. I told historians that victims are the most reliable witnesses to their own experiences, and that documentation created in the moment is more valuable than recollections gathered decades later. Education is how we prevent repetition. Type educate if you believe teaching hard history matters. The 8 women who came forward publicly became friends, a sisterhood forged in shared trauma and shared justice. We meet once a year, when health permits, at a tea house in Beijing. We're all in our 70s and 80s now. Some have passed away. But we gather to remember, to honor those who didn't survive, to celebrate the fact that we did. We talk about our grandchildren, our gardens, our aches and pains like normal elderly women. But we also talk about the power of what we did. How 51 women's documented testimonies changed the conversation about wartime sexual violence in Chinese historical discourse. How our case is now cited in international human rights law discussions about the importance of victim documentation. How justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes it's justice carefully, painstakingly built over decades. I want to be honest about the cost. Documentation and justice came with a price. For years, I lived in fear. Fear of discovery, fear of retaliation, fear that my secret would destroy my family. My marriage suffered. I could never fully explain why I sometimes woke up screaming, why certain smells or sounds triggered panic, why I kept a locked box that I wouldn't let anyone touch. My children grew up with a mother who was physically present but emotionally distant, carrying trauma she couldn't discuss. When I finally revealed everything to my husband in 1985, before going public, he was devastated. Not angry, just deeply sad that I'd carried this alone for 39 years. I wish you'd trusted me, he said. I wish I could have, I replied. But I was protecting you. All of you. Trauma affects everyone nearby. If you've loved someone carrying unbearable weight, comment, loved one below. People sometimes ask me, was it worth it? Carrying that burden for 40 years, sacrificing peace of mind, risking everything? Yes. Unequivocally yes. Because without documentation, our suffering would have been erased. We would have been forgotten, dismissed, our experiences reduced to rumors and whispers. Instead, we're part of the historical record. Undeniable. Permanent. General Zhao died believing he'd escape justice. In a legal sense, he did. He never faced trial or imprisonment. But his reputation is destroyed. His legacy is one of shame. When people search his name, they find the documentation. They find our testimonies. He wanted to be remembered as a hero. Instead, he's remembered as a predator. That's justice of a kind. Not perfect but real. I'm 75 years old. I've lived longer than I ever expected. Longer than many of the other women who suffered alongside me. I'm telling you this story because documentation matters. Evidence matters. Recording truth in the moment, even when it's dangerous, even when it seems futile, it matters. We live in an age where everything is recorded, filmed, photographed. You have tools we couldn't dream of in 1946. Use them. Document injustice. Record abuse. Save evidence. Not for immediate justice, that often doesn't come. But for historical justice. For future accountability. For the moment when the powerful are no longer powerful, and the truth can finally be heard. If you believe documentation is resistance, comment document everything below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. I spent 40 years hiding 6 notebooks. Now they're in an archive, preserved for future generations. That's the power of persistence. Of patience. Of refusing to let your truth disappear. General Zhao Yunfei thought his rank and power made him untouchable. And for most of his life, he was right. But I outlived him. We outlived him. And our words, our documentation, our refusal to stay silent, that outlived him too. He's been dead for 35 years. I'm still here, still speaking, still witnessing. That's the ultimate victory, survival. Testimony. Truth that refuses to die. My name is Chen Meiling. I was raped repeatedly by a Chinese general when I was 16 years old, along with 50 other women and girls. He thought his power protected him. I documented everything. Every assault, every victim, every detail. And now his name is synonymous with shame, while our names are synonymous with courage. If you're suffering in silence right now, document it. Write it down. Record it. Save evidence. Not for today, but for the day when your voice can finally be heard. That day will come. I promise you, it will come. And when it does, you'll have proof. You'll have power. You'll have justice. Survivors, you are not alone. Witnesses, you have power. If this story changed you, comment below and share it. The more we document, the more we speak, the less they can get away with. Thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing. Thank you for believing.